Good afternoon, everyone. I'm David Gaynor, the U.S. Consul General of the U.S. Consulate here in Perth, Australia, and welcome to our presentation this afternoon. First, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Second, I would really like to welcome our four distinguished panelists today, Beth and Jeremy and Narelle and Dane, for what we feel is a really interesting, important topic, why diversity makes sense for our businesses. We have four leaders in their fields out here in Perth to discuss this topic, which we think is extraordinarily relevant, especially at this time of divisiveness across the globe. We also think, as we are looking at celebrating and currently celebrating both NIDOC Week last week, Pride Month here in WA, as well as Native American Heritage Month in the United States, we think it's extraordinarily appropriate to talk about this topic, not just today, but in the weeks and months ahead. So I am going to cut my remarks very short because we're here to hear from these experts. I'm delighted to pass over the floor to Beth, who is Associate Director at KPMG. Beth Shaw will lead the discussion. Beth, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Consul General David Gaynor, for that introduction, and to the Consulate for convening this very important discussion in celebration of Pride Month. Pride Month is a very important time for all of us to come together both in person and virtually to celebrate the diversity of the LGBTIQ community. And I think as part of these celebrations, it's always an important time to both celebrate the progress that has been made and reflect on the work that still remains to be done. And I think as we look back on a lot of other social movements in recent years, including Me Too and Black Lives Matter, we can really see it's clear that it's no longer acceptable for allies to sit on the sidelines and support these movements passively. And incremental change is no longer acceptable when it means that members of our community are still exposed to discrimination and violence. A critical part of changing social norms is engaging business and the role of business. The role of business in terms of creating safe, respectful and inclusive environments for all of their people and benefiting their organisations from the diverse perspectives that different communities can bring. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to facilitate a discussion on the role that business can play and how business can benefit from inclusion. Joining me are some incredible advocates and change makers in WA. We have to my immediate right, Jeremy Wray, who is the lead Inclusion and Diversity Council Australia member for BakerHughes. We have Narelle MacFarlane, acting Global Inclusion and Diversity lead at Alcoa. And at the end, we have Dane, Patrucco, who is the Australian chapter lead of the Pride Network at Chevron. So welcome, fabulous esteemed panelists, and thank you for being here. There's a lot to discuss and a lot to learn. I will be greedily kicking off the discussion with some questions that I've prepared, but I would recommend that as we're talking, you all start thinking about some particularly challenging, curly, controversial questions for the panelists. I can say that confidently because I don't have to answer them, I just direct them. So for anyone in the room or online, if you do have any questions, we will be calling on you in about 15 minutes. So do have a think about what you might want to ask this fabulous panel. So to kick us off, I just wanted to ask the panel, when we're thinking about starting action on inclusion and diversity in businesses, we often need to marshal support from leaders to allocate resources to people to support the case for change and to join us in our mission. What have you found, and Dan, we might start with you, what have you found is really resonates from a business case perspective at Chevron in terms of building that case for change and the support that you need to start that work?
Well, at Chevron we operate complex processing facilities and safety is paramount. And as part of that is personal safety as well and mental health safety as well. So safety is at the forefront of everything we do. So creating an inclusive environment for everyone to be their true selves in their workplace, which they spend the vast majority of their time at, is really important. And personal safety is right at the top of that list.
Yeah, what about you? What's resonated at Alcoa in terms of getting that buy-in to
I think number one for us is really the values. It really lines up with the values of the organisation. I think, you know, we had a session this morning where Mark talked about, you know, most organisations have values and, you know, they, you know, sit in the bottom drawer. I think our organisation, we have them there and it really lines up. One of our values is people. And, you know, if you're trying to influence a leader, you just need to hold that value up and they're like, of course, it's number one and it really does resonate with all our leaders. We haven't really had a battle with any of our leadership coming on board. And certainly one of the other things, apart from safety, that's been a mining organisation, of course, but for us, it's also about talent and it's also about the bottom line. When you talk to leaders about that it impacts the bottom line, they're there.
Yeah, fantastic. Jeremy, what about you?
I think it comes down to a couple of things. One, it's aligning to our values, the same way as organizations. In BakerHughes, it is grow, collaborate, lead, care. And all of those come together in supporting the inclusion and diversity initiatives that we have. I think we're large companies that operate around the world. I know that we have employees in over 120 different countries, cultures, and we really want to ensure that everybody has their voice heard. We need to have a workplace where everybody can feel comfortable in bringing their ideas to the table, where they can feel that they are heard and that they are valued. And if we can create that, productivity stems from that as well.
Great. One of the nebulous things about values is that every organisation has them, but it's quite hard to tangibly bring them to life for people across the organisation. Have you got any examples of how talking about values or how what leaders and other people have done in your organisations to really connect the values to the work that you're doing in the United States?
Yeah, okay. I think it's fairly easy. It's the right thing to do, you know, and I think when if you've got leaders in your organisation that are showing through leadership, the right thing to do for them isn't that hard to connect the dots to inclusion, equity, and diversity initiatives. But supporting it, I think you need people with passion. You know, you do need those people that are going to be that lone nut sitting out there. Hey, LGBT inclusion, come with me, get on board. You've got to have that lone nut, but then you've got to have those followers. So once you get those allies, you've really got to look after them. They are critically important to making sure that the message is cascaded through the organisation. Without those followers, the lone nut just lone nut.
Yeah. I think in each organisation, and particularly we all work for quite big organisations with significant international footprints and resources to invest in really kind of embedding that value piece in organisations. So I know at KPMG we have, you know, our desktops at various times have our values written on them. Our leaders kind of commit what we're doing to values, and really try and take them from some kind of, you know, what's in a document or a code of conduct, quite intangible to something that's a lived reality. And Dane, to throw you under the bus slightly, I know that Chevron talked a lot about the Chevron way. Is that something that you've connected to the inclusion and diversity as well?
Absolutely. I mean, we work by the Chevron way. So the Chevron way behaviours that we all display, and we're also ranked on them as part of our performance management process. We have to make sure that we are doing the Chevron behaviours. And, you know, like Jeremy mentioned, and also Narelle, we do operate we're a global organisation. We do operate in a very diverse range of countries as well. So it's being able to demonstrate those Chevron way behaviours in all the areas that we operate and all the behaviours as well that is key to how we to our performance.
And I think having something like that's very clear that people understand and that it's referred to is so crucial in keeping, you know, behaviours and values front of mind. It's not just the end that we're getting to, but it's how we get there that's so critical in these discussions. In terms of the things that your organisations are doing in the inclusion diversity space, I know that growth is nearing 5 months right now. And I'm really interested to hear some of the initiatives and the actions and interventions that you might all be working on in your various roles to really celebrate and elevate 5 months. Jeremy, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Maybe back to the last question. little bit. One of the things that we found that is very important is aligning the different employee resource groups. Because of the different cultures and countries that we work in, there's more or less levels of acceptance where we're at. And we found that by having cross promotion of some of these events, something that might be potentially a taboo subject or not easy to bring up in certain countries around the world, we can link that to an initiative that's not as taboo. An example of that is what we're planning for World AIDS Day. Now, that's something that over the past few years, our private work network has been leading globally in terms of trying to get the awareness campaign out. But we know that there's certain countries where it's not easy to talk about that. So we've linked with another one of our groups called Living Well, which focuses on physical and mental health. And we've talked about an awareness campaign for sexually transmitted diseases, which is something that affects anybody. And by building an awareness campaign, we bring a message forward in a way that may not be confronting to people. And it's that way of doing it across events.
Fantastic. And that's a really good lesson, I think, for all of us, and the considerations around cross-cultural awareness and what might resonate in one context might not resonate in another. So, Narelle, any interesting initiatives or pieces of work that you're doing in the private space to draw attention?
Yeah, look, I would say we're actually having a fantastic week this week. So Alcoa is celebrating Pride Week with normal march and the parade. So we're not doing that, obviously. So we're doing Pride Week at all our locations. So it's a fantastic week to be involved in this week. And our, I was telling somebody earlier, executive sponsor who sits in Rotterdam, unable to travel at the moment, probably got a bit of time on his hands, said, well, why don't we make it global week? So we're having events all around our locations in some of the areas that have typically been quite difficult to get awareness to, such as Pittsburgh office and our North American colleagues, and in Europe as well. So certainly been some amazing things happening there. But I think generally one of the things that we tend to do very well is our awareness raising. So I think, Jeremy, you talked about different levels of understanding and awareness. We're a very blue-collar workforce. Most of our employees have worked for Alcoa for 30 years. They sat in the same chair in the crib room for all that time. So, this is quite confronting for them. 15 years ago, they had to do it because of supplemental. So to now turn around and be inclusive of all people is quite challenging for them. But they're very receptive. But we do need to tailor that awareness to that conditioning and get them on board. But we've had some amazing stories out of that too.
As you're talking, the reflection for me is the incredible role that business actually play in changing social and expectations of behaviour. And I remember before I worked with KPMG, I worked for an NGO. We did a lot of work on human rights and advocacy. And I always felt like I was outside the tent, trying to beat on the door and influence people to create change. And then when I started at KPMG, I did this pro bono project that was about how businesses can support people experiencing domestic and family violence. Worked on it for 6 months, worked with all of these major companies, and we got everyone to sign on to this model of support where people would get paid leave if they're experiencing violence, all sorts of support in the workplace, all designed to make sure that if you're experiencing violence and more vulnerable to losing your job, the organisation's really wrapped around you and make sure that you're supported to keep your job, maintain your economic security, and hopefully move away from the violent situation. And I remember after 6 months working for a business, I was really struck by how much change business can drive in communities, and policy changes that can affect tens of thousands of employees in one go. I really staggered and thought, what's the difference here? Sometimes being in the tent and organisations with resources who are massive employers and outside the tent. So it's something that I often think of in terms of the work that business leads to really change those conversations. Dane, how's Chevron going in terms of Pride Month that you've been working on?
Yeah, so probably continuing on from what Narelle was saying, we do have a large blue-collar workforce as well, with our 2 gas plants. So we're actually kicking off this week, actually. We're painting one of our crosswalks at Barrow Island Rainbow. So that's just an initiative, a visibility initiative to start the conversation. It was actually to restart the conversation because we have been having that conversation for a long time, and it's actually trying to restart that conversation with our workforce. So the idea of a rainbow crosswalk was one of our committee members, our prior committee members, who is an ally, thought that, and works sometimes on our remote assets, and thought seeing the rainbow as you get off the plane to go to Barrow Island really starts that conversation. So we're actually in the midst of launching that this week to start the conversation, and then start some education activities with our workforce on our Gorgon asset, and then eventually expand that to our other gas assets as well. So it's all about starting the conversation and continuing that way.
Great. And I was quite struck, we all put up last week to talk about some of the work that you're doing, and I was really struck in our conversations that for your organisations, it's not only just the support provided to LGBTIQ organisations, but there's also been some way to support family members as well in the broader community. I want to talk about some of those initiatives. I thought they were fantastic.
Well, we came to a conscious decision in our community that it's not always just about our identifying employees. Our identifying employees are on their own journey, but also we need to support our parents and families and friends of identifying people as well, because they could be covering themselves up and not being able to be their true selves and talk about their families when they're in the workplace, especially when for those that are on FIFO rosters and they do 2 and 2 swings or 4 and 2 swings and that sort of thing, not to be able to talk about your family or your friends or what you do on your R&Rs, can be a hindrance, especially to productivity and performance when you're back in the workplace. So to open the dialogue and talk about our families and our friends is really key.
A great example that came out of a meeting we had earlier this year. We celebrated International Pride Month in June, and we ran a global pride parade, a virtual pride parade, because no one could go out, and we thought it would be nice to give a roadshow of the different chapters we had and take photos of what had been done in the past. And the conversations that came out of that, one of our allies came to us afterwards and said that he had a child that was transitioning and that he was on his own journey of what it took to be a good parent and what he was learning. And he stepped forward and said, I'd like to volunteer to help put together a positive parenting campaign. And in ways of, we didn't even try to do it, it was just organic. And we had someone come and say, I've learned this, and I'd like others to understand so they don't have to go through the journey again. So we built that campaign, and it's something that we run once, and our employees can go and do what they want again.
I think, what's coming through is the power of personal stories as well. And we had one of the most popular articles on our newsroom in the last year was one of our leaders at KPMG reflecting on their own experience as a parent of a child who came out, and their kind of how they responded, how they acted, what they felt, and what they reflected on how they could have handled things better and what they would have done and what they know now. And it was one of those things that I think reflects the changing times of our businesses, in that people didn't have those conversations 10 years ago. And I think with a lot of topics, things like mental health and well-being, people are showing vulnerability and showing different sides of themselves that actually enables them to forge better connections with their people as leaders and really change the way people think. So I think that personal narrative is very powerful. Now, did you have any thoughts on support for families or that kind of leadership piece on telling personal stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. That's probably one of the most powerful things we do. We have what we call our chapter meetings once per quarter. We're actually having one tomorrow, and we've got one of our operators coming to talk to the chapter, tell his personal story. We had one last year, and I think we had no dry eye in the room of somebody sharing their personal story. So they are extremely powerful, and they do. I suppose if you want to say, convert people to our business case, is definitely a way to ensure that it gets people in the heart that these are real people and they've got real stories as well. But one of the things that we do ensure that we're doing a lot of is our community work. So as an Eagle network, which is important in our corporate gamers with equality, we do a lot of volunteer work. Last week we attended Safe Women Safe House in Jarrah, which is a support network for domestic violence, domestic family violence, and basically we did the whole garden. A couple of weeks before that, we supported the wellness event at Mandurah and set up their whole event for them and those sorts of things. So it's an opportunity for us to, I suppose, brand ourselves in the community and have them ask questions about us as well, and certainly support awareness in the community.
I'm conscious that we're sitting here hosted by the US Consulate General, and it sort of has lends itself to an interesting question, or when organisations have a presence in both Australia and America, is what are the considerations and the differences that you're finding with the work that we're doing in Australia and how it compares internationally, and some of the considerations that different groups might have in terms of messaging and partnerships and level of risk appetite and things like that in terms of the approach to some of these topics and these debates.
I think we've taken the approach that we have common language and guidance for what we want to put out on a global level. Recently, all of the leadership team at BakerHughes, so CEO -1, went through a full-day workshop on an ally training. We partnered with the HRC, Breast Campaign Organization, to help deliver that. For some of our colleagues, we've got a very active chapter in Italy, and they have aligned with another organization for Europe-centric to support. Within Australia, we're still working with our global teams, but we are also working with like diversity. We've recently joined the Diversity Council of Australia to help make sure that our message is tailored to the organization, so that we're not just telling people this is what's happening in the US, and this is what you should care, this is why it's important globally.
Yeah, we're probably a bit the same. Pride Month is celebrated in June in the US, and whilst we do celebrate with our US counterparts and our other counterparts around the world, we do sort of have our own agenda, I guess, here as well, just to make sure that we're being inclusive of our operations in Australia. But we definitely do work with our US colleagues or our global colleagues on the same messaging.
I agree with that. I think you do need to have similar messaging and common language, but you also need to have that regional perspective. So obviously this year in the US, the Black Lives Matter movement has been extremely important to our workforce in the US. So we've been very respectful of that, and how can we support you in making sure that we're cascading messaging that is very supportive of what they need to achieve there. But certainly, I think some of the things that have happened globally have really escalated the importance of inclusion and diversity. And I think COVID has actually escalated that even more. I would say that, I've been in inclusion and diversity work for a number of years now, and to me, it's never had such focus. And that's all of our employees and leadership globally.
And so, Narelle, you do touch on a very important topic, which is the impact of COVID. And so just before we throw open to questions from the audience more broadly, I'd love just to ask the panelists to reflect on the fact that we are having this conversation in the middle of a global pandemic, had incredible cost to lives and livelihoods and well-being across the globe. I think we're incredibly lucky at this point in time here in Perth, but for all of us, I think big organisations who felt impacts of job uncertainty, budget uncertainty, and I think a broader business uncertainty in terms of what priorities are areas of focus. How has that impacted your inclusion and diversity platform and your ability to get traction in your organisation? And what are some of the other kind of unexpected byproducts of COVID-19 on the inclusion and diversity environment?
For mine, I think it's actually brought us together a little bit more. I think we were having this conversation last week, and we all got on the Teams chat calls and all the Teams meeting calls and Zooms, WebExes, whatever whatever applications we're using, but you know, we've got to see each other's children walk into the room or our dogs walk into the room. Again, I know we were on a call last week and my dog starts snoring every time I'm on a call. Quiet the rest of the time, but as soon as I start talking on the call, my dog starts snoring. So I think we've got to know each other and had an insight into how each other outside of the office. You know, I know people that have put a business shirt on and then worn shorts and slippers, you know, while they're sitting at their desk. So it's just a great insight into how we all view and how different we all are. You know, some people are messy officers, some people clean officers, some people show their photos. So I think it's actually brought us together a lot more, and it's actually started that conversation where you can now walk into the office and you're like, oh, how is your dog? Is he still snoring? Whatever, you know, how are your kids going? Did they finish their homework and that sort of thing? It's actually started that conversation that we're connecting with.
Just point out the snoring dog is alive right now.
So I'm sure he's smart.
And yeah, likewise, I think, you know, we're actually seeing each other as human beings now, instead of putting on the, you know, the dress or the suit and the tie and putting on that, you know, that face as you go to work. So when we see the CEO of our company sitting in Pittsburgh, he's sitting in his attic and he's got his catwalk across the screen, we would never have known anything about his personal life. So we feel a lot more included now as part of that we are a bit more of a family. And I think they have also recognised that as leaders, this is the time where they need to step up, and they have.
I think one of the things that we've realized is that we have employees in countries where workplace was one of the few places where they felt safe being themselves, where they felt that they had to be in a closet, at home with their family, community, but because of the culture that we tried to establish in the workplace, they felt comfortable. And some of these employees have had to work from home, some of them have back in the family may not have accepted that. So that's something we've tried to be mindful of, ensuring that we're still finding ways to show that connection, that we still care, and it varies country by country, obviously, but it's showing that message of we're here, we're still part of your extended family, getting to know you better, like that. So it's just being mindful that everybody has.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So moving now to questions from the audience. We have Trustee Kyle from the Consulate around the corner who's going to provide us with some of the trickier, more firmly pointed questions from the remote audience.
Yeah, so we've had a question from Judy for the panel. At ECU, we do a lot of work in the D&I space. We've recently done some research in an organisation I would consider to be mature in this space, but there is still evidence of some backlash, particularly in regional areas. How do panel members deal with backlash in their organisations?
That's right there, that's all right. We've got lots of experience in backlash. As I mentioned, we've got a workforce, we're in country areas, people live in the community, have been there for many, many years and in the workforce for many years. So when we started on this journey and still to this day, we still get that, well, this is political correctness gone wrong, we don't have any gays here while we're talking about this, all that sort of commentary. So we get a lot usually by email, but we do get it when Mark's doing the presentation or any of us are doing the presentation. But it's, well, let's have a conversation, either then and there, or typically, you know, hey, I'd love to catch up with you and let's talk about it. And then when you actually have that conversation and talk to them about, we're not trying to change your beliefs. You know, absolutely, you're Christian, Catholic, Muslim, we are not trying to change your beliefs. It's about your behaviour and being more aware of including everybody in the organisation. So that, for me, has worked, and I think we've been pretty successful at that because we've been toughing it out for a number of years, but that's when you do need to support your allies. So you need to be able to arm your allies with that good information that, you know, what's in it for them message to be able to support difficult conversations that they might
Dane, did you?
Yeah, I think regionally that is where we struggle, but we do have our most work cut out for us. It is just trying to share the story, and I think the personal stories really do help, because it helps with that connection and it helps people with the empathy side of things. But definitely regionally, I concur. It's a struggle sometimes, but it's also just about continuing that conversation and asking the reasons why, and then demonstrating the reasons why you have to be inclusive and demonstrate inclusive behaviours.
Aside from what you said, I think the other thing that we can say is refer back to our values as an organization, and we are here to better the work environment for our staff and hopefully grow their empathy, understanding, and support them and their families.
Yeah, great. And I think the critical element of what you've all said is really calling it out and not sitting behind and letting behaviour that's unacceptable permeate through the workforce and create an environment where people feel unsafe or excluded. And I think we're getting better, but one of the sort of challenges I think for any big organisations is how do you empower people at all levels to call that behaviour? And what I've had a reflection on through a lot of client work in this space is if there's a leader that witnesses some behaviour that's unacceptable but doesn't do anything, that really sets the tone of impunity throughout an organisation. And often in quite hierarchical organisations, more junior people will observe that behaviour, expect that person to speak up, and if they don't speak up, then more junior people won't speak up in their place. So that kind of middle senior management and leadership is so critical in dealing with that backlash and calling out behaviour in the moment.
Like Jeremy said, it comes back to your values and your culture that you're trying to set within your own organisations. Speaking up is key.
And I think as part of speaking up, what's critical is creating that environment of psychological safety, so people do feel like if they see something, they can say something. It's obviously the most desirable to call something out at the moment, but that's also the hardest for some people in terms of personality types, in terms of hierarchy, in terms of what they work with, or confronting a dominant culture. So at least having that kind of other avenues for reporting conduct and raising issues, I think is really critical. So psychological safety is something that we're focusing on a lot with organisations and internally, and we're trying to support people to feel confident to speak up at any point in time in relation to all sorts of areas of behaviour. Kyle, do you have any other questions?
I do. So this question comes from Troy. How do you see developing emotional intelligence, or EQ, linked to developing an inclusive and safe environment, especially starting with leadership?
I'll maybe pick up there. So at Alcoa, we, like many organisations, do psychological testing of all the employees, etc. So we have actually just moved to EQ testing rather than aptitude and behavioural testing, and linking that truly with our values. And what we're actually linking that to, again, is inclusive leadership. So, you talk about that bystander behaviour, whereas inclusive leaders will have that emotional intelligence to be able to pick that up and see the substance behind that and support that. So it's certainly something that we have shifted our talent acquisition team towards, and they are being very supportive of ensuring that we are recruiting for inclusive leadership rather than not necessarily technical leadership.
And after recruiting for inclusive leadership, you're aiming at our program on an ongoing basis to sort of assess against or structure KPIs against leaders' inclusive leadership capability, or provide ways that leaders get feedback on how effective they are in creating an inclusive environment.
We haven't got there yet, but certainly as part of standard performance management procedures. But we have a behavioural model that we were talking about earlier today, making sure that leaders are assessed in regards to that behavioural model, which includes leadership.
Dane?
Yeah, so we have inclusive behaviours coaching, so we can do courses on inclusive behaviours behaviours and the coaching around that inclusive behaviours, which then arms you with the confidence to sort of address those non-inclusive behaviours as well. So I think the ongoing coaching and it's also about self-development. You still have to self-develop around your inclusive behaviours as well and learn for yourself as you go along and leverage your peers as well on what they do to arm themselves to make sure that they are inclusive behaviours.
And who does inclusive
We did have an organisation come in and do inclusive behaviours coaching, specifically with our leaders.
Okay, leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. So with our leaders, our extended leadership teams, and then our employee network leaders as well were invited to come along and partake in this behaviours.
Aaron?
It's something that our organization has been reviewing over the last couple of years. We went through a couple of years of mergers and acquisitions and rebranded and changed. And as part of that, we sent out a wide culture survey. Got a third-party consultant in, and it went out to all 60,000+ employees around the world. And it was a lot of questions about how do you feel at work? Do you feel connected to your team? Do you feel that you can be open with your leader? And it's probably the most advanced workplace culture survey I've ever seen. And they got a lot of feedback from that, identified key areas. You could break it down by what part of the world you're at, where it's more inclusive leadership, where you need to work on. We came up with themes of what we needed to work on globally, and that was identified. One of the areas was actually LGBT included, identified. But that has now been, the feedback from that being built into the new leadership learning development catalog that we put out.
Anything else from the interwebs?
Yeah, we have, so just one more question. Recognizing that we are all complex and multidimensional, I'm curious about what your organizations are doing in the intersectionality space.
Right. So I think this is a very important and very tricky area for organisations who often can be quite siloed in about some of these issues. But really, when it comes to inclusion, that's kind of the goal altogether. So kind of having reflections on intersectionality and responding to that.
I think it comes back to something I mentioned earlier, that we've got, within BakerHughes, we have 6 enterprise-level employee resource groups that we have available in every country. Not all of them will have those. And then we have the country-specific ones as well, if they're necessary. But it's around alignment. I mentioned one earlier around our private work group working with the Living Well, the World AIDS Day. There was another one we did an event last month where we came together and hosted a confronting unconscious bias training, and it was a combination of our private work network and our women's network, and it was aligned to National Coming Out Day and Breast Cancer Awareness Month. It was an example of groups coming together, talking about something, and hunting stigmas, concerns, how we can learn from each other. Maybe not as intersectional as maybe what the question was, but really building off these events and coming together.
Yeah, I agree. We do have a similar sales practice. We have an inclusion council that we're all representatives from all our employee networks within Australia. We have 9 employee network groups in Australia, and then we also have our D&I, and that's employee driven as well. So the employee networks nominate a representative from their committees that will go and sit on the council. The council sit and they work together on addressing intersectionality and making sure that we are working on the different diverse pillars within the organisation. So as part of that council, we also have D&I advisors that sit on the council, corporate affairs, and we also have 2 leadership members, leadership team members that sit on that council as well. Like I said, it's employee driven, so we go through a nomination or not election process, but we sit down together at the beginning of every year and we nominate a co-chair or a chair, and then we fill it out different responsibilities to each other. But it's all about coming together and making sure that we are creating that inclusive culture that all the employee networks actually stand for, and then again, what our behaviours actually ask us.
Probably it's very much similar. We've got obviously different inclusion groups coming up to a council and supported in that way.
Right, thank you. Sarah,
Yeah, this is, I think this question is directed at Jeremy's previous answer, talking about the survey. Did anyone mention bullying in the survey?
That, checking my memory now. There was a question, I believe there was a question in there around, did you feel that there was bullying in the workplace? It was something I was addressed. It was.
I think I remember it.
Yeah, I think it was something that was addressed and action plan was put out because of that.
anyone in the room with us today who might have a question that they want to pose to the panel? Excellent. Paul?
Thanks, panel. I'm Paul from Australian Inclusion Group. I think as we know, we've been working at diverse places. I mean, the title of these sorts of things is always diversity, but actually we live in diverse times, particularly in a global environment. Our workplace and our community are diverse. So it is the inclusion part which is critical both for the individual and the success and the benefits that the company gets. But research also shows that because people start from different places, particularly if you're in a minority group, if you get treated equally, slightly counterintuitively, you never get ahead in an organisation. So sometimes in order to get true inclusion and get equity, you need to treat people differently. I'm interested in your thoughts on that, but also in large-scale businesses where you've got to have lots of rules and procedures and systems where you can actually treat people differently, give people more promotion opportunities and more opportunities within the organisations.
Probably, maybe you're talking about targets versus quotas in some things that you can measure, but as you say, also in other areas where you need to escalate the underrepresented to be able to get that role model and support. We certainly have targets. We haven't gone down the quota route, but the other thing that we're also looking at is to try and measure. So all the underrepresented groups and all the different inclusion groups, how do you measure that baseline to be able to know what you're working from? So for LGBT inclusion, for example, we're measuring gender identity, but we're not measuring LGBT. So, you know, are we going to go down that path? And that's sort of the next conversation I think we need to look at, so that you can actually then start to put the resources where that requirement is for the underrepresented groups. We're certainly there with gender equality. We know what our baselines are. We know the things that are going to make a difference. I think Beck and I were talking earlier, you know, there's no silver bullet for any of these things, but I think the opportunity to continue the good work and continue to grow those areas is where we need to focus.
I think there's an interesting parallel between your question, Paul, and the question from Judy earlier around Backlash. And I think if you're trying to reach an equitable outcome, sometimes you do need to treat people differently, and that can lead to backlash if that kind of real business case or case for change and the understanding of the issue isn't clear. So a lot of the work that we do at KPMG around trying to get more women into leadership roles, for example, relies on things like sponsorship programs or extra development or other initiatives that we've really targeted towards a particular group of people. And absolutely, there are times when other groups, groups of men might say, I need extra support, I need help too. And, and I've also observed with clients that being the case too, and sometimes there's capitulation from the leadership saying, oh, let's not just have a program that targets this group because then other people will feel upset and excluded. Actually, I think it's quite powerful to use that as an opportunity to talk about the fact that, in terms of representation in organisations, in terms of access to leadership roles and in terms of the barriers that different groups experience, we're doing something that's really targeted to try and achieve that outcome. And I think that requires that really courageous leadership and that comfort with the material and comfort in having those conversations that can be quite confronting for some people. But it's about being really clear on what the organisation's trying to achieve. I'm not sure, Dane, if you have any thoughts on that equity versus equality
question as well.
I probably will concur with yourself and Narelle as well. You're always going to have those sorts of different groups, whether it's our committee against each other. The same can be said for quotas for targets for Indigenous employment, or we just recently launched our Reconciliation Action Plan. We have certain targets in there that we're trying to achieve. So of course you're going to be elevating one group over another group. But it's just trying to have that healthy balance, right? And again, the story behind and the context behind why you're trying to reach these goals and why you're trying to help these minority groups achieve what they need to do.
I think I'll add on to that is that we have got a number of different levels of inclusion and diversity discussion within the organization. We've got a global inclusion and diversity council, and we've got regional and more local. So I sit on both our Asia Pacific Inclusion and Diversity Council and our Australia New Zealand Papua New Guinea Council as well. And once a quarter, we meet in that council with all of the leadership team. Our HR group will come in and talk about what's happening and some of the metrics that they've been working to. And we get the chance to be fairly open and give our feedback of, I think this is working, it might not be working. We might want to adjust something for this particular region or, and it's setting up within your organization those forums where you can adjust and not be held rigid to something global.
Our Inclusion Council also works pretty closely with our D&I advice, our D&I group, our human resources function as well, just to make sure that we do have a planning meetings, we do work out strategies as a collective as well, where we do work out where we need to focus our attention or what pillar needs to have our attention.
We have a couple of questions in this audience. Yes.
I'm Sky from the Pride Network. I have a variety of questions, but I'll just ask one. I currently am undertaking a research study for pride and diversity for university around discrimination in workplaces, and one of the core issues that's come up with big corporations, where it's been navigating those inclusive personal values when working in countries where it's actually illegal to be open in any of those things. I'm just curious about, for all of you, as you've mentioned, working in a variety of countries, how do you navigate that inclusion and the values that we have as a corporation, whilst also how do you provide that laws that you're operating?
It's tough.
It's tough, yeah.
Yeah. And you talk about employee safety. We've got a joint venture operating in Saudi Arabia. Clearly, if somebody has to be married as well, so far less identified as LGBT. So it's really challenging. We would steer clear of allowing any of our employees, even you, for them to make sure that they kept safe. But what we do is, if we're not in the game, we can't change. So, from our perspective, when we are working in countries that maybe culturally don't align with our values, we make sure that our values are known, and the opportunity for us to then be part of that change, as tough as it can be, is something we recognise and we are aware of.
Comes down to leaders as well. I remember an email going out from our CEO and chairman a few years ago. It went out enterprise-wide, and there was a bit of backlash from certain countries as well. And the response was simply, this is core to our Chevron way behaviours. We don't discriminate on what country we send this to, because you might not know that someone sitting next to you might identify as LGBTQ, and they're just afraid to come out. However, if the company is seen to support them, then that sort of helps them come to their safe space. And like Jeremy mentioned before, some people's safe space is their workplace where they can be their true self. So, leadership plays a very key role in making sure that you don't discriminate with certain countries and that sort of thing as well.
Probably the only other thing to add to that is we recently joined the United Nations Global Compact Initiative, and I'm looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. So by being able to say that we're aligned to a global framework that we're working towards this, it sometimes helps to refuse conversations, but it certainly challenges. And I mentioned we earlier this year opened up a factory or a new factory in Saudi Arabia as well. And there's challenges around that, but it comes back to these are our values. We make it every year in our corporate responsibility report, this is what we're focused on. These are our employee resource groups. We don't hide from it. We're not there to change people's behaviors. It's about improving people's understanding, but not changing.
And it's quite interesting. I think the kind of tension between companies being driving change in social attitudes versus working in and respecting the cultures that they operate in is a really interesting tension, particularly when working overseas. But even in the Australian context, I thought there was some interesting reflections around the same-sex marriage debate in Australia and the role that companies took in advocating positions on that. And I think it's quite interesting. KPMG has taken quite progressive positions on some of those topics, and received backlash from some clients around, what's your role, what business are you in? These are the kind of social positions that you're advocating for. And so I think for all organisations, there's that question of, how far are we willing to go on this stuff? And I think Qantas is right out in front of the same-sex marriage debate and see this playing quite a leading role in that business coalition as well, which is interesting. I'm going to say the question maybe here. Yes.
In terms of getting the issue to get your organisation, do you find it's easier to when they have a personal relationship with the people?
Absolutely. It's like the, gender equality debate. The leaders in the organisation, mostly men, if they've got daughters, they're on board, they're on the bus. So, and it certainly helps with their messaging as well. If they're talking to any of our networks and they've got a personal story, it really helps them be engaged and people really feel that they can be a part of their life as well. So, I think from my perspective, absolutely.
Our personal stories, yeah. And I think I read last week, I'm not sure if anyone else has read the book Honeybee by Craig Silvery, which is just come out. It's a really, I highly recommend it. It's just come out. It's about, based in Perth by a well-known Australian author and deals with issues of gender identity. So I think, in the absence of having access to leaders in organisations who are sharing personal stories, using culture and the arts as a way to build that empathy and that understanding of the real experiences that people are going through and stuff. It's very, very powerful and effective. So we've got just a few more minutes left, and we've had a very wide-ranging conversation, which has been quite fascinating. I'm really interested in following on from that conversation we're just having around the role that businesses play in the broader community. I know that your organisations are more formed relationships with various non-profit and community organisations as well to make a sort of more broader difference. Do you want to speak about some of those things in the context of some of those partnerships?
It's something that we just did a few months ago, coming off the back of International Pride Month. We identified 3 different charities that we were interested in supporting on a global level, and we put it out to our deliveries membership. So instead of just going in and picking, we held a vote. It was open for 5 weeks, where people could go. In the end, we ended up picking an organization called the Trevor Project. And people would hear it's a US charity around supporting youth. And we've aligned that as our official 2020 charity for our private work network. And there's a matching scheme for donations. So we found it was good to put it out and get feedback and make people feel they were engaged in that decision. And we've got a lot of positive feedback from that and are able to now work with the Trevor Project to help bring certain training and ideas into it.
I really like that idea. I might steal that one. From Alcoa's perspective, we obviously support by WA, which will go ahead this year, but we do also support a lot of organisations in the community. Youth Focus is a charity that we support. We also support LGBT youth. Alia, Coburn region, we support them as well, and also Headspace in the Mandurah area.
Yeah, so we work closely with a partnership, a community partner that identifies the community groups that we that we can support through corporate giving. Corporate giving is a big thing for us, where our company matches dollar donations from our employees to different groups. And we're in the process of actually identifying some LGBT comfortable charities within that group of charities that we can support, so that we can actually advertise to our employees that these are the LGBT charities that are out there that we can support.
Fantastic. And I love hearing about all of that stuff. I think just generally it's great that organisations have a footprint beyond their doors and the communities that they're within and where their people are coming from. But also, you know, in terms of those matching schemes and donations, in terms of volunteer projects, it's really, I think, such an important way to engage your employees internally in what the difference they can make in their communities by being part of your organisation. And I think there's still that scrappy NGO girl inside me that is always on the hunt for funding for non-profit organisations. And I know that so many organisations are really struggling with the competition for funding. So that role is absolutely critical. That has been such a fascinating discussion, and I have learned so much out of it personally. I'm so grateful to you all for sharing your insights and experiences with us. I think my reflections from what you've been talking about is, you know, the absolute importance of that authentic, visible, engaged leadership in terms of empathy and inclusivity. The power of personal stories in terms of engaging hearts and minds of organisations. The fact that a lot of the initiatives and projects that you're doing are really about raising awareness and how fundamental that is in building understanding. Anchoring actions and response in organisational values. Taking action in a way that really resonates with your cultural context, and really, when you get down to it, inclusion being at the heart of absolutely everything that you're doing. So thank you so much for that, and I'll hand back to Consulate General Perth.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for what a fabulous discussion we had today. And to steal a line from both Dane and Narelle, it's really about starting and restarting this conversation. We, the Consulate, are certainly dedicated to restarting these conversations on a frequent basis. So I'd like to thank Beth and Jeremy and Narelle and Dane, our participants here at the residence, and all of you online who are participating online. We look forward to our next discussion, but thank you all for participating.